right, so we have been approached about the property on Interlake and Crossroad that is currently owned by Miles Moffett and Trust. And it is under contract to be purchased by Jim Scalise from SK Design. That's my understanding that it is his intention to develop it into however many parcels he can develop it.
Where did you hear that?
Who knows?
Okay, but I don't think we should enter in the record, frankly, what his intentions are. I also had heard that he might just be planning a single family home there.
Well,
I don't know.
I asked him at the select board meeting last week, the sister meeting. I asked him if he was SL Design. He said yes. And I said, are you interested in that property? He said yes. I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, develop single family homes.
Okay, that's great then.
And I asked how many, and he said he doesn't know yet.
All right.
okay. So, well, that was my understanding, and I believe that what right or wrong is the understanding of most of the people who are here today, who are generally, from all the emails we got, not so happy about it. So the committee will discuss what we think is are the merits or lack thereof of this particular property. The Community Preservation Committee has set aside $300,000 undesignated. We have virtually nothing in open space at the moment, so we have very little to spend. I would not recommend the entire $300,000. That would leave us broke, and I don't want to do that. The reality of this is that if the asking price is $600,000, we can't do it alone. If we think that this is something that we want something we want to enter into. Putting a conservation restriction on a piece of property is complicated. This particular piece of property is not particularly noteworthy unless and until it would be connected with the property on the other side of it, on the east side of it, and then it would be also abutting Peter Ackley's property, which is also in a conservation restriction. That would make for a very large parcel of conserved land. As a standalone, from a conservation point of view, it's not particularly attractive.
But Craig's property is mostly wetlands.
Yes,
So there is, in terms of, as far as nature is concerned,
that property is.
I mean, it's not going to be developed because it's wetlands.
Exactly,
So, there is actually, it does create some contiguous benefit to
Yes.
potentially conserve.
but it's not official.
Well,
And I'm not sure that it doesn't have to be, because I was reading through some of the conservation restrictions on the botanical garden and what is required for a conservation restriction to be, the state has gotten much more stringent as to what qualifies as a property that ought to have a conservation restriction on it. So it's kind of a big deal now. This is a lot of big deal, just saying. Do people have thoughts about this? Patrick?
I'd like to hear, I've been involved in a little bit already. I'd love to hear what others think.
Carol? Just going around the table.
I mean, I'm the anti-density kid. I would buy it and I'd throw every penny at it.
I mean, I
And I would
think
not worry about being broke.
realistically,
Some broke before.
the town is going to have to step up if we want this.
Yes, they are.
And the neighbors, frankly, have a real stake in this. And if the neighbors aren't willing to put their money where their mouths are, that's a problem too. If the land trust does not feel that this is a worthy project, and Laurel Hill, I mean, we have to have more stakeholders than just us. We don't have it.
Yeah, well, you need to match the offer on the table, as I understand it. Michael, nod, shake your head, nodding. Michael is nodding. So we need to match the offer on the table. If we have some part of money up to 300,000, if the town can move money from free cash or stabilization, I don't know the difference. That's some money. And then, yes, folks would have to step up and bring it up to the difference between what we could dedicate and what they could, what we need between that and the 600,000. But we can get a ways there. I agree with you. If we had both parcels, it's even more delicious. But I would also say, if you look at where it's located, you have the Waller Farm, Orlyton. You have the historic district, the Curtisville, Old Curtisville Historic District. You have Liz, who won't build anything. And also has a frontage
That's not
problem.
going to count for the state.
I'm just
Yeah, no, I
describing
get
the
it.
square.
I get it.
Okay? I get up to 640 acres, I get a square mile. And then you've got 70 acres with both Moffats. I mean, you get pretty close to a square mile. It's a very pretty thing about Stockbridge as it stands now. It's a lovely little square mile.
Well, I'd save it all, but
Well, I'd say it all, so that's why you called on
that may not be something, it's possible.
Well, it'll be what it is.
Jay,
Sally, do we, are we, I may have missed the point. Are we required to receive a plan for this project? Don't we need that?
well, right now, because it's in chapter 61, the town has, which means that during the course of the length of the chapter 61 designation, they have had a reduced tax rate. And it's not like a conservation restriction where it's in perpetuity. So the chapter 61 means that when the property is sold, those taxes that were not paid during the time of its being in chapter 61 need to be paid. And as if it were whatever the assessed value is, and so the balance of what they did pay over the course of the length of this chapter 61 designation, and what the taxes would have been levied, had it been not in chapter 61, the balance of that has to be paid at the time of the
But
sale.
I think what Jay's asking, and I think it's a very legitimate, extremely legitimate question, is don't we have to have an applicant before us to consider this?
Yeah.
There is no, the land
Well,
trust isn't.
the town is the applicant in terms of whether
I get
or
that.
not,
But was shaking his head no.
yeah, whether or not they accept.
I think that the point is that of the three, there's a government player, town Stockbridge, or several potential nonprofit players, BNRC, Land Trust, Laurel Hill Association. And so far, none of them have put an application in before this committee. I think that the most we can do today is indicate our intention should someone step forward as to whether or not we as a group would want to reconvene and vote in an amount. Because in the absence of an application, I don't believe we have the authority. There's other issues too. I mean, every application we get goes through a vetting process where town council determines whether or not this is a legitimate use of taxpayer money. This is public money we're talking about here. We don't have the authority to just decide that we can, in 2 days before the warrant closes and 4 weeks before town meeting, spend people's money. So I think that the most we can come up today is to say, if somebody puts together a proposal to acquire this land, would this board have an inclination to support that based on the fact that it would have to happen really, really quickly because we're about to close the warrant. And once the warrant is closed, and we got any land acquisition by the town has to be approved at town meeting No, but none of us have the authority to do that.
But that's,
That was,
To grant the money.
Yeah,
that's
right.
the point of this meeting. Do we, as a committee, do we think that this is something that we want to spend our money on? If we do think we want to spend our money on it, that may or may not influence the decisions made by the Land Trust and the Laurel Hill. And Conservation will discuss it tonight as to what we think is whether we would recommend to the town that this should be a property that is conserved. And I mean, we've got two sort of different pots that we're thinking about. One is preservation of the neighborhood and not having a development made there, and the connection of the two. I mean, even though the one property is not officially in conservation, it is an unbuildable lot.
Right.
And then on the other side of it is a property that is in conservation. So that would give, as Carol pointed out, nearly 100 acres of land that would be contiguous.
And contiguous then with Waller Farm, which is several hundred.
But that's not in conservation.
Actually,
is.
actually, I
Farm?
believe that it's none of my business to answer this, and especially not on the public record. But I could recommend to you that you check that.
Okay, because I thought I had a full list of what was in conservation. I know that the property across the street is in a family
I swear
trust.
to God, I could get you to a square mile.
It's a family trust. I'm not sure that it's a conservation restriction.
I'll tell you off the record.
Okay. All right. So this is what we
Haven't
need
finished going
to,
around the table.
this is what we need to consider. So Gary, what do you think?
I think that it's an interesting proposition and it's just, I've got bits and pieces of information just like everybody else here does, but I don't really have what I'd consider a firm grasp on the whole situation. I know that it appears that the Land Trust has no interest in it, as well as Laurel Hill. And BNRC, I gather, does not either. So
That's what we've heard so far.
Yeah. So we're kind of in a position of it feels like a fait accompli unless anybody else had an interest in it. We'd be a minor piece of the puzzle, I guess.
Katie?
So very new to this board. Thank you for having me. I'm a little confused on what we're actually discussing and voting on because there is no application to go off of. So
Right.
I don't know if we're talking about the 300,000 because somebody said maybe the townspeople can raise the other 300,000. I don't know if they're looking for the full purchase of the land.
I think we're just looking for a consensus of the board at this point,
Yeah,
Right.
because is
And-
the board is,
and not a vote.
yeah.
Just where are we leaning? We've been asked by the public whether community preservation money could be used for this project.
Yeah.
We're not voting to do it. We're just trying to get a straw poll in effect as to how we lean. Do we think that this piece of property is important enough for us to put forward money? If we decide that it is, then we still have to have partners or it can't go forward. So if we think that it's important, will that sway the Land Trust, BNRC and Laurel Hill to put up money?
In the town itself.
And the town, and is there private money that would also be accessible? And as Patrick pointed out, we're really up against the gun
Yeah,
in terms of time.
even if, from what I understand, even if we vote today to purchase the land, there's still a lot of ifs, buts, and we're under a time crisis.
Right,
So even if we do vote to put some money, there's no guarantee that the other money is going to be raised or funded.
right. Exactly.
Oh,
And without that, we're nowhere.
But But can the CPC board itself, and this is where I'm new, so I'm just asking a question. Are we allowed, because there's no application, can the CPC board put in an application? I'm confused about this part. Because who is the money going to if we do vote?
We can't vote on any money today. What we can do is declare our intentions, be
Gotcha.
part of a solution. And I would also point
Oh,
out
okay.
that our option is not only to use anywhere between 0 and 300,000 of the money we have in the bank. We are allowed, we've never done it, but we are allowed to bond. So we could do, for example, 30,000 a year for the next 10 years. And that would be the same equivalent of $300,000. You guys have said in the past that you don't have any inclination to bond. I think that the reason why bond is there is because land acquisition is expensive and it lets you buy important tracts over time. That begs the question, though. It's been a really interesting year. I'll take my turn now, if that's all right. It's been a really interesting year around land use. Land use is all over town. We got this property. We have folks talking about the system. We have folks talking about the Glendale Middle Road. A lot of folks are kind of worried about land use in their neighborhoods. And this right here is not a way to do land use planning. We need better planning. Okay. I'm suggesting to the people in the room who are involved in government, we need better planning because this is a very reactive process at the last minute, which can do nothing but disappoint. Okay. I hear all of you. I live next to a giant field that has 40 acres. It used to be Foster's farm. I wouldn't want to see 15 houses go up there. I completely get it. But the alternative to that is we are going to have to start to think about under what parameters we want to allow some development, under what parameters we want to have both bylaws, regulations, and money available to solve this problem if you think it's a problem. Because I'll tell you this, our subdivision regulations haven't been updated since 1979. All right. And if you think that this is the same town as it was in 1979, it ain't. All right, there's a bunch of things you could do in those regulations if you want to make it a little bit more worrisome, made it a little harder, frankly, to develop some of these large tracts. There's lots of things we can do with planning, almost nothing we can do at the last minute. So yeah.
So how do you initiate that planning?
Why don't I?
How does it happen? Who starts this up?
Look, I think we need, there's a lot of ways you can do it. One, we can go through a master planning process where everyone in the town gets to weigh in.
But who? Is it the select board that decides to do
It's the
it?
planning board. The only group in town that can initiate a master planning process is the planning board. We can't even do it.
And that's happening.
So someone has to go to them and say,
It's already happening.
will you do this?
It's already happening.
How long has it been happening for? How many years?
A couple of weeks.
Oh,
We just got to the point of, yes.
okay, so you're doing.
There was a master plan developing 20 years ago and it never got validated. So
We don't have that plan.
no,
We don't have an open space plan.
nope.
We don't have a community preservation plan.
Right.
These are documents that are gonna need to be crafted so that all these different concepts come together with consensus, not with reaction to an individual situation.
And I believe that every one of the last 10 sales, it's been over $1 million. And it's starting to become really profitable to take these big open tracts of land and split them up and build a house on them and sell them. Okay. And the hardest thing for us to manage is the economic impact of market conditions. And folks, this is Stockbridge and the market conditions are not conducive to open space right now. This is a different landscape after COVID than it was before COVID. You never used to be able to make enough money to make it economically viable to take these pieces and chop them up into, parcels and, McMansion them. Now it is.
It's true.
So just to wind up my thoughts, because I'm speaking from an historic perspective, $100,000 is a lot of money, first of all, for something that is still a little amorphous. Also, there's the Tenneco gas pipeline. And we also have another stakeholder, which is the Stockbridge Muncie community. And we have to complete investigations with them. And some of the material that they would share is in confidence and can't be made public. The Historical Commission can know about it, but can't dispense it. So we got to get these stakeholders a little tighter together.
Without revealing anything that you can't reveal, do you believe that this is a property that the Stockbridge Muncies have concerns about?
My most recent conversations with Tribal Preservation Officer is that everything should be considered historic until it's,
It's not.
confirmed by them.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we have to respect that in every way.
So assuming that it was purchased for subdivision, it's possible that it might not be able to be subdivided in the way that somebody might think would be optimal.
Yeah, I mean, again, you don't exactly know what this builder / shareholder here has in it. I'm sure residential is a big part of it, yes.
Interesting. Jay,
Well, I don't want to be repetitive, but I think the key is what forum is bringing this idea forward? What is the plan? What are the alternatives? We can't fund the entire situation. We're a piece of the pie. What is a potential solution? It's a little premature from our perspective here. And we really don't have a total understanding as to what the expectations are. I would add one question, and it may be an inappropriate question. Is the Community Preservation Committee the proper forum for this particular idea?
it may very well not be. But the point is that we've had, a lot of folks come forward and ask us if we would spend community preservation money on this project. And I felt we at least needed to meet and allow them to express their opinions, which a lot of folks have done via email. And if and when we make a decision of any kind, at least we would have had a public hearing saying, these are our thoughts. This is why we did or did not do what people are hoping we would do. And
I have a question. The land is on Interlake and Crossroad. It's where that gate is. The
Yes.
gate, yeah. How much is frontage along the crossroad? Do we know that?
It's enough for two houses, the frontage.
Oh, so it goes back.
It goes back.
And how close?
33 acres, 35
So
acres.
two houses along the road and the others go back. How close would it come to the town, to Interlaken, to the houses in Interlaken?
It could have bought them.
Right up to them. It's like right,
It goes behind 7 or 8 of them.
yeah,
Right.
okay.
And let's remember the four corners model, all right? If we're gonna get creative, not only could we bond some of it, the other thing we could do is what they did at Four Corners, which was they preserved Four Corners back, not back when, but at that point, the thinking at Laurel Hill was preserve the entrances to town. So they preserved Four Corners, which was a bigger lot originally, and then they split off some of it for a building lot that could be sold off so that some of it would stay in the tax rolls and some of it would maybe be developed into a single family home. So the idea was the total cost would be reduced by some kind of, resale of some component of it. And in this case, you could take the 1 or 2 lots that have frontage on the road and add 1 or 2 neighbors. I think that would be very nice neighbors for everyone. And what goes in the back could then be saved. I don't know if they'll be nice or not, but I don't think we should be necessarily against having neighbors, and then most of the land in the back could then be conserved in a model where it doesn't cost whoever the player is the full 633,000. You end up with something, we've done this before is my point.
Yes, we have
Yes.
one Mackinac
Yeah.
Road,
Right.
for instance.
Yeah, and we are not poor and.
Was a large-ish property, not as big as this one. And it was worked out that they could build a one-family house
Mhm.
and the rest of it would be conserved. So that is also a possibility that the
It's just-
bulk whatever, I don't know what acreage is going for these days, but it's not cheap.
150,000.
So if you,
It's, if you priced it to what you see now, this is double what it would have been.
yeah, well, it's not that's the other component of this, which is the assessed value is nowhere near what they're asking.
No, and if you double it, that's about.
And that's an issue.
But you say that, but I mean, look at the question of what land is worth in this town
Right.
is, I mean, things are under
But
assessed.
there are regulations that say that you can't pay twice what it's worth.
Well, private
You're gonna
developer
use-
can, because at 40,000 a house, I
private
mean, it's a pretty
developer-
good deal.
And you can do that if you don't have a mortgage.
A private developer can,
Yeah,
a public entity
I'm not
can't.
suggesting that. I'm saying that somebody in the room could, look at, somebody's gonna have to put this deal together. CPC's job is not to put together land deals.
No.
All right. Someone in this room is gonna have to put a deal together. I'm suggesting to whoever that is, be it a nonprofit or a neighbor or somebody's gonna have to think about creatively about how you might finance, come up with the money if this is important to you. And you're gonna have to do it really quickly. Because my sense of, my sense is that that this goes to town meeting and says, take 600,000 in free cash and put it toward this 30 acres. It's got about 0% chance of passage. All right. And not to say it might pass, but let me explain kind of how free cash works. We've got a couple million in free cash, and a lot of it is designated toward paying for the firehouse in that gap between when some financing comes off in 2033 and when it goes live in 2027 or 2028. $633,000 is about 2 years of those payments on the firehouse. All right. First class in economics, my freshman year, they said guns versus butter, which is you got money and how are you going to spend it and balance it? And man, that would upend the apple cart potentially on the new firehouse. Not to say that everyone could just pay another $100-200 in taxes to buy this land with 2 days notice, but I'm suggesting to you that we are going to need to have more than just the easy have a vote at town meeting.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of this meeting.
Can I continue? So,
Oh, sure, go.
no, you finish and then I'll continue.
I said the point of this meeting is to gauge how this board feels about this project. Do we want to be a contributor to this? Because we can't, well, we could do it alone, but we would have to decide that this property is so vital to and it really is conservation. It isn't so much of a community preservation because it's going to have to go under open space. So we would have to decide that this open space is so important that we would contribute to it either out of the money that we have in reserve or, as Patrick suggested, to float a bond. But my feeling is that we should be part of several organizations that have expressed their, I know that there has been discussion amongst other parties that could potentially be our partners in this. And not one of them has to date said, oh, yes, let's run right ahead and do this. So we could, if we vote yes, or we agree yes, they might change their minds. But right now, we're standing alone. So the question is, do we think it's that important? Is this piece of property so important to the town of Stockbridge that we should go forward with it? Let Ann finish.
So what I feel is that we're being squashed by developers. Where I live, we've got a sister there and this here. And it's very upsetting that our beautiful countryside is just going to become divisions of houses. And these are not houses for Stockbridge. These are houses for someone to make a lot of money and sell to whoever will pay the most. Someone who's not from Stockbridge. So it's people coming in, buying the land and making a big profit of it. And so I would hate to see it develop, but I think we're going to be squashed more and more. And there's, we don't have a lot of land, but I'm sure we've got enough open space that other developers would be after. So is this piece of land worth spending a lot of money on, or do we hold the money and there might be something more serious coming down the line? And also personally, I would like to, even if there's something built, I would like to sort of delude myself that it's not there. So like things are pushed back from the road and you can't see them. You know what I mean? Then it still looks
Still there.
It still looks real,
Right.
even though it's there.
I just like to support what Ann's saying, and this is a way to put a stake in the ground and say it's not so easy in Stockbridge as it's been for the last couple of years, that this does matter. I know you're saying the importance of a specific piece of land, but I think it's the importance of the direction in which we are going. And at some point, we've got to say stop. And I'm prepared to say stop today.
And one thing we can do.
And I'm not saying, God bless all the neighbors. I'm not saying your neighborhood or this 35 acres in this neighborhood is the most important piece in Stockbridge. And I don't feel I have to say that. I feel I'm saying, knock it off. Stop now.
I mean, I've lived,
Hello.
Yes, please
With that,
go
though.
away now. Did I?
my mother always said, unless you own it, you can't control it.
That's exactly, that's right.
And the problem with
And so-
conservation is that, that when that owner, when that ownership changes, it only takes one owner who kind of wants to, do this, and that land is lost forever. I have a suggestion.
Say forever
CPC,
again.
CPC has, give or take, around 450,000 between the local and the match every year. Well, I know we can't predict it. I'm not making that point. All right. And generally speaking, it's kind of, we got three buckets. You got open space, you've got housing, and you have historic preservation. So I think that, there's the term that the housing trust has thrown around. I think Randy brought us all, whatever, the capital step, which is sort of like, we're never going to build it all ourselves, but we're willing to be part of this larger thing where others be able to cobble it together. So if we were to say of the 150,000 a year, let's say a third of that number, we could say we'll do a 10-year bond, $100,000, just 10,000 a year on any property that someone can put together the capital stack to acquire. And that says that's a stake in the ground. If it's important enough for conservation that the partners want to come together and conserve it, that they can rely on CPC without really, other than what's legally required, to say, yeah, sure, we can put 100,000 towards that $600,000 deal. And then it's up to preservationists and nonprofits and people with means to figure out what properties are, who's going to put in the rest of that.
Katie and Jay, we're not spending any money here today. This is a hypothetical meeting. Nobody applied to us. This is all hypothetical. We're saying where we stand with respect to this. That's all we're doing. We're not spending a penny.
Let me make one comment, Carol, if I might. The thought is that we've skirted the issue. It's critical to develop a plan that has a cast of characters, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because what happens here is whatever comes out of this is ultimately a potential precedent situation, okay? This is going to come back again and again. That's right. And we need to dig into it with a plan. We can't commit unless we have the details. We're being asked to develop the plan. That's what I'm
We have
sensing.
no time.
Yeah. That's
But Jay,
the problem.
this is the group that represents all of a whole bunch of the stakeholders of town. You got planning board, you got
Right.
Rural Housing Trust, select board, finance committee. I mean, this actually is a pretty good group to brainstorm this issue because we can go back to our constituent groups and reporting this discussion. So,
Right.
yeah, there's that.
Well, conservation will meet tonight.
Yeah, them too.
Yeah, thanks.
Who's, are you conservation?
I'm not, but I have a question.
She's Parks and Rec.
Who's conservation? Sorry. Well, it's the obvious that frequently evades.
That would be me.
Ain't that the truth?
That would be me. I mean, my family put our 40 acres into conservation on a conservation restriction in 1990 something or other. We could have made a big fortune on that property, which is wide open with frontage on both sides. We could have, and we didn't. We put it into the conservation restriction and we look at each other every once in a while and go, God, we could be rich. And then we remember that we took a vow of poverty when we got married and we've kept it well. So,
Well,
Right.
so, I mean, these are things that people, there was another piece of property in town maybe 15 years ago that it hit the fan when this property came on the market. And the neighbors were up in arms and they were jumping up and down and screaming and yelling. And I forget how much it was going to sell for, but it wasn't very much. And the neighbors were well-to-do and could have bought this piece of property if they'd each put like $10,000 in. And it would have been off the books and they wouldn't be, I mean, the development is fine and it's nice and it's tasteful and all that stuff. But, they could have purchased this property. And I think it was $100,000 at the time, but now we're talking $600,000. That's not $10,000 a family unless there are folks.
A year, I said. Oh, whatever. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they could have pooled their money and they could have bought this piece of property. It's gotten to the point, which I think somebody brought up, that it was, that's no longer the case because properties are getting so expensive and it is profitable for developers to come in and buy these properties and build subdivisions. The subdivisions change the character of the town significantly. So I don't know. This
Yes.
comment,
So I live in the neighborhood,
yes.
an old historic neighborhood. It's one that there are still families in that people know. And we're losing that in this town. It's very clear. I know that there are neighbors who are willing to put money in.
absolutely.
And they're looking for some help. That's really what this is about. And we thought it would come from Stockbridge Land Trust, because we thought the mission was to preserve communities as well, and that didn't happen. And Laurel Hill has some big expenses coming up, so that could
What?
happen.
Yeah, really.
I can't, but it's over 100,000. I mean, it's a biggie. So, and our stocks have gone down too. But there are players they're definitely neighbors and they're here too, who, have already said, I will give something. And there are people who aren't even neighbors who are saying they'll give something.
exactly
because this is important. This is really important.
Sure.
This is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Stockbridge.
I feel like this is a plea for Interlaken. I mean,
It really is.
It really is.
Between what,
Somebody has to step up.
between what's probably going to happen at DeSisto. What part of Interlaken do we try to save?
How long has this land been on the market
Since
for?
November.
So let's do a straw poll as to what we think, yes or no. Would we put, my recommendation would be $100,000. That would be my recommendation toward the purchase of this property. Rich, would you talk about what
What do you want to do?
the land, I'm going to put you on the spot.
You want to do your straw poll first, or do you want people to talk?
No, I'd like you to give us a sense of what the land trust talked about before we do that, because
Right.
you're kind of in the same boat we are.
Yeah. I'm gonna read this just because I'm a better reader than a speaker. So, and I just want to reflect that the Stockbridge Land Trust is made up of 14 volunteers. We hold a number of conservation restrictions, about 21 conservation restrictions in Stockbridge that amounts to over 350 acres. Peter Ackley is here and we have two CRs with him on Willard Hill. I'll just point out one of the things that Patrick brought up was the fact that, you know, the town and the residents are really being pushed out of the market. The land trust has its own sort of what we call its war chest to have money set aside to acquire land when we can. But that war chest is pathetic compared to what the actual values of these properties are going for. So it's not something that we're even remotely in the capacity of doing in full, let alone even in fraction. So with that, I'm just going to read this statement and hopefully it'll all make sense. The land trust is not in a position to purchase the land. The assessed price is $150,000. As such, we would generally assume that the fair market value for the land is between that and $300,000. The current sale price is in excess of 4 times the assessed value. As a nonprofit, we cannot purchase a property well over the fair market value. Even if that $600,000+ was the fair market value, we don't have the capacity to participate in any significant way. Additionally, the land trust has had a general position of not owning land, but rather focusing on holding conservation restrictions on properties. In reviewing the land, it is predominantly white pines, and so it meets the general forestry provision of a conservation restriction. There are, however, considerable presence of invasives on the property, especially where it abuts the conservation land to the west. Just a general statement that I didn't have included in this statement was just that, you know, one of the things that we found challenging as a land trust working with landowners who have conservation restrictions is bringing up the awareness that there are invasives on the property and they are taking hold of that property and trying to encourage landowners to do some work to remediate that. But depending on the invasive, it can be prohibitively expensive or just practically impossible to keep up unto themselves without procuring additional funding or grants. Other than that, short of a thorough baseline report, it's unclear what other conservation value the property presents. According to our recent CR work or conservation work on Westdale Road, we have experienced the fact that the state has changed this conservation restriction template and emphasizes more concrete requirements to their conservation restrictions. The land being sold by the Moffett Trust should not be confused with the land to the east, which is owned by Craig Moffett. Craig's property represents a more diverse ecosystem, and the argument can be made that the wetlands on that property feed the Stockbridge Bowl, which checks off many more check boxes on the state's conservation restriction template than the Moffett Trust land. It is the position of a number of members on the land trust that a modest development similar to another one located on Interlake and Crossroad could be possible with provisions for conservation setbacks to protect the conservation land on the west and the wetlands on Craig's property to the east. And speaking with our colleagues at the Berkshire Natural Resources Council and Laurel Hill, it appears that they have come to the same general position on a number of the items I just brought forward. That said, if a number of residents wanted to create a coalition and ask the town and CPC to assist with the purchase of the property, and the town in turn required a conservation restriction on the land, Land Trust would be willing to work with you all to make that happen.
How much is in your war chest?
Not even the assessed value of
But seriously,
less than 150K.
okay. And how much is in your war chest? Laurel Hill.
Laurel Hill, I think it's 1.1.
It was 1.3 was the market that.
No, that was 200,000 was in assets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I used to be the treasurer of Laurel Hill.
So, and if we did that, we would completely deplete our
Right.
funding that would go towards existing projects that we're currently working on, so.
Right, but my grandma used to make patchwork quilts, and I'm a big believer in patchwork quilts. There's a lot of money even sitting in this room.
I would just underscore that what you've all spoke about, in that you would need to create a coalition of private residents to work with you.
Yeah.
To secure the funding to make this work.
That's right.
That's the only way this is really gonna realistically happen.
We're trying.
You know, if it were up to me, and I would agree with Sally, so like, I'd love to see the land just be left alone. But, you know, the reality of the fact is that this isn't necessarily the most high priority property in terms of just 35 acres with respect to other things that are going on. The other thing I just want to point out is that if we think about the most historic land in Stockbridge, I would argue it's on Eden Hill. Right now, there's a development on Eden Hill that is happening, and I don't believe there's been significant oversight with respect to historical, cultural investigation on that land. So we need to be better at practicing what we preach in terms of what we're saying that is historic and those things. Before we can start arguing that, you know, I'm not arguing that this part of Interlake is not historic, but I just want to point out that we're being rather inconsistent in how we phrase things based on the convenience of the situation.
And look, Stockbridge is one of, Stockbridge has a significant representation of wealthy landowners here. And it's gotten more so in the last 20 years. You know, we can see most of the sales I mentioned were well over $1 million. That is not workforce housing, any stretch of the imagination. We're gonna need, if maintaining the bucolic rural character of the town is important to the town, folks are gonna need to do what they did on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket and other places where big money was necessary to conserve some of these tracts. And they're gonna need to come together and pull that together. Because in the absence of that, the market is gonna develop this land. All right, and I would say to you guys, you know, having been on the Laurel Hill board for a long time, I'm not now, it's a lot easier to raise money for land acquisition and for operating budgets. All right. I love the programming at the library and the rest of it, but you're never going to raise any money doing that. You're going to raise significant money saying our job is to protect the rural character of these landscapes, and we're going to need your help. Where's your $100,000? All right. You know, we're a month away from finishing that high school. And if we could raise $8 million, the money's out there, wherever it is. I don't have any sense of direction that way. Yes. Yeah, one of my
I
many.
just want to point out that Stockbridge Land Trust is a volunteer organization, so our operating expenses are practically
Zero. Good.
and we have a challenge in raising money to get people to believe in the fact that we should have money.
It should be a wake up call, is all I'm saying, because it's going to happen over and over again.
I mean, I was a founding member of the Stockbridge Land Trust, and that was the whole thing, is how do you put together the money and the different,
You got Peter Burley with you
I
guys?
mean, the work that you
Yeah.
do is through
Yeah.
coalitions and working
Yeah,
with
exactly.
different landowners and residents to come together and do something. That's
And
what
to-
happened with Camp Bog. It happened with Four Corners. It did all, you know, so you have to work on that in that way to make it happen.
but we spent a lot of time talking about how do you preserve a nice big parcel without bankrupting, you know, either the organization or the folks that are willing to contribute. And the One Mackinac Road was the very successful way of doing it.
So was Ben
A
Farm.
nice house that went for a goodly chunk of money, which basically paid back the investment that the organizations put in. And that is a possibility for this property. That if you could build, say, 2 houses on this piece of property and preserve the rest of it, I mean, those houses would sell for $1 million for sure. And that would way more than pay for the original investment. So I don't know. It's
Just also have to recognize that the entire eastern boundary of that property is the Tennessee Pipeline, so it's not
Right.
the most bucolic view.
But yeah, we're conserving not for views, for people. We're conserving for nature, okay?
I get that. I
Yeah,
get
the
that.
critters don't care whether there's a pipe going through the property. I mean, honest to God, it's like, you know, it's not.
I hear that.
I
I'm
know.
just simply saying from a development standpoint.
And let me just say again, in whatever way it is undeveloped, you have a huge chunk there, almost a square mile undeveloped. And that has to do with how Stockbridge looks. It has to do with what happens when you inhale. It has to do with how much oxygen producers we have in this town. I mean, we're talking about, it has to do with water and water quality. This is big time stuff. And I say again, at some point, you've got to say not here. We used to say not here a lot. That's how we got to the place where we're so attractive. And we got to start saying, again.
Yeah, we're the.
You asked for a straw
Tipping.
poll.
Okay, straw poll.
So in
Okay,
this one instance, and I don't believe that this should be a policy where we just simply don't have enough resources. But in this one instance where the other players to come together with the capital stack, I would support 100,000 of the reserve and a 10,000 a year bond for 10 years for this one property. With the understanding, we may not be ready to decide this part, that the 10,000 a year bond would allow us on a rolling basis at any given time to be participating up to 10 properties. And people could rely on CPC, that if they can put together the rest of the money, they can rely on CPC, which means, by the way, it's vetted by folks like the Land Trust of Laurel Hill. They could rely on CPC to 100 grand, and we could do up to 10 of those at any given time, which means we'd be bonding out $100,000 in payments any given year. And when we get to 10, we stop until one of them's paid off or do the next one. So that gives us the ability to support some folks without being the primary provider, because we got to be the ones who validate, not the ones who, you know.
that's right. I don't do money. He does. I
Not well,
do.
by the way.
I do. Don't say that.
I know, kidding.
Mr. President, can someone say something? Are we allowed to speak?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We will,
We'll speak after you take a straw vote.
yes.
Thank you.
She's the chair.
But I mean, this is.
And she's very good at it, Jackie. Okay. I'm not doing the money. I'd support whatever financial plan and whatever amount. I would spend the whole amount and let next year take care of itself. But what I do is psychology. And we have got to change the way we are seen in that world. And we are not everybody's chance to make $1 million. Now, if you want to do nothing, if you want to sit around and wait till somebody or another writes a plan, which could be a year from now, you're going to be out at least 300 acres and probably more. And I say we have to do something that says it's like it used to be. It's not so easy to get it done in Stockbridge.
We also have a fiduciary responsibility to the
Over
people of the
what?
town,
Over
all right?
what?
Over what we recommend, how we recommend it, who the participants are,
Excuse me,
and
we're
what the
recommending it
objectives
to
are.
the town, and they are voting, and they have the fiduciary responsibility. At any rate, I wholly support this. I do not know, as a matter of fact, that it is the most significant piece of property in this town, but I do know that it's time to stick a stake in the ground and say no more.
Okay. Gary,
I'd vote for the 100.
okay. Katie,
It's hard to grab the concept when there's really no plan. So we do this 100, if we vote for the 100,000, we're just throwing it out there to hopefully other people can fill in the rest of the 500,000.
Yeah.
I'm gonna vote no because it's not a concrete plan that I can see.
Could I say one thing?
There is no plan.
I know, so
The plan is to conserve the land, and whoever puts the rest of the money in would apparently be conserving the land. So that's the plan. So that is a plan, even though there isn't a plan on paper.
the
That's what I
plan
have.
is to conserve that 35 acres.
Well, I'm
But
gonna
like,
do it without
how?
permission. Katie, you're new to the committee, so let me tell you something about this committee. We have looked at ourselves as seed money for projects that do two things for all the years that we've been organized. It gives a boost and it gives a validation. It says this committee, community preservation, supports this action. And we gave startup money for it. And that's what we've done with whether it's Norman Rockwell or whether, whoever comes to us or the Waldorf School or whatever. And this is the same concept. We're saying we believe in this action, just what Ann was saying to you, what Sally was saying to you. We believe in this action and we're going to give some money. We can't give it all. We can't ever give it all. We're not in that position.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all we're saying here today.
And the only plan before us is to conserve, do we want to conserve that piece of property, 35 acres, or do we not feel that it's an important enough piece of property that we want to put our money there?
What she said.
And even if we do put our money there, we decide to put our money there, it still won't go forward if there isn't funding from other sources.
Yeah, and that funding would have to come before,
June 8th.
even after the town meeting?
Sure. We have 120 days.
Well, now.
Town has a right of first refusal and is the only other legitimate purchaser.
Yeah, but I thought the
We're
town
not,
has to
we're not a
vote.
purchaser.
Doesn't the town have to vote?
It would have to go on the warrant, but,
Yes.
Yeah.
It goes on the warrant,
but our
100,000.
100,000 would go on the warrant.
500,000 doesn't have to get voted on?
You don't have
Depends.
it to give.
That's what,
Depends
yeah,
where it comes from. If it's private money,
Right.
if private
It
money can
wouldn't be
get
voted
donated to
on.
the town.
Let me throw this one out. The Community Preservation Committee would express an interest in working with a coalition to develop preservation of an area with certain subjectivities to funding, to partners and so forth. So basically, we're interested with subjectivities is pursuing the idea. We cannot make a commitment until all the partners come together. How about that? Okay?
Exactly.
I could get behind that.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay?
yeah.
I mean,
You
that's
said
just,
it better.
that's just responsible management.
yeah.
Linda,
I'm really sitting on the fence here, but I would feel much more comfortable with 50,000 being allotted and with the assurance of the many people who've written these emails that they might step up and get people to contribute. If it's that important, we have this small deadline. But I think committing to something that is not completely clear on paper or in people's minds
Right.
is a hard one.
Yeah, I'm behind you on that one.
So
nothing is going to happen unless the rest of the money is raised.
Right.
Right.
So it doesn't.
No matter how it comes into being, we're not voting to spend this money because, as it's been pointed out, we do not have a plan in front of us. But what we are voting is the will of the committee to put forward the $100,000, assuming that
Subject to,
that the rest of the world together and says, we've got the other $500,000 to do this before June 8th.
I'm arguing that myself, but I'm just saying there seems to be a need for confidence that some people are going to come forward and not have this expectation that there's a vast amount of money that can be put towards this. The CPC money always goes through vetting and looking for matches to make that go farther. We've got 186 towns going for the money right now. And we're going to get less next year. It's inevitable. So we got to watch the pennies,
Right. Well, that's
the dollars.
that's the bottom line, is that we have to decide, is this piece of property that important? And
I would like to say yes to 100,000 or more, But I am really concerned about what's going to be coming up in the next few years and conserving, because we don't know what's going to be happening. So I would much rather vote on 50 than 100, but I would go with 100 if that's a consensus.
Liz?
I would go with 100, but I'm not sure I should be voting on this.
I don't think.
The chair said you were over.
All right. No, I would definitely go with 100.
Okay.
I'm sure there are people out there who are going to try and match it, and that shows goodwill.
Well, I think we have a consensus. And now, having done that, we need to know who Leslie is. So if you can give us your last name, please. Whoever is Leslie on Zoom.
I just was in the other room for a moment. I'm Leslie Iafredo. I live at 9 Quiet Knoll Road.
Okay, thank you. Alfredo. All right, sorry. Go. We just need to know it for the minutes. Thank you. Go ahead, comments. We'll give 2 minutes to folks.
There's a lady there, so.
No,
We're gonna go around.
What's the time?
No, we're gonna start right here. Ma'am, did you want to speak? Say your name, please.
I'm Hillary Bedell, 11 Willard Hill Road. And this is just our plea to keep the character of Interlaken as it is. I feel like it's very important, worthwhile. And we've got some financial backing.
Yes.
So
Is there someone in your area and with your group who is sort of spearheading this effort?
I think it's too early to say, but
Okay.
there's been a lot of community interest. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll happen, but we have to
Right,
work a little more.
okay.
Peter Ackley at 15 Willard Hill Road. I would like to just reiterate what Hillary said, and I've always had a great feeling in my heart for this neighborhood, and goes back in my family quite a ways, and it's one of the most historic parts of our town. And I would like to hopefully work on this with anyone
Well, you
else.
have some experience, right, with putting your land in conservation? Or was that your family that did that? Jamie, did you want to say something?
Jamie, Select Board. No, I'm just listening. Thank you.
Teresa?
Teresa Zanetti, Castle Hill Road. Patrick mentioned, conserving for nature. Are we doing that with all property in this town? Or would we be doing that for the property on Glendale Middle Road where you want to put up a housing development?
Who wants to do that?
It hasn't been.
Who wants to do that?
No, my pushback, Teresa, because I hear this all the time, is that land was donated by Hans Morris to the town.
That's fine.
We're going through a process, through our due diligence about A, whether it's buildable, and B, how to make that decision. But this narrative that we didn't go acquire that land, and believe me, I said in public session to Ms. Forbes, when she talked about some of the challenges to nature there, I think that, I don't see any process we can go through other than a measured process around due diligence to decide on all of these properties if they have conservation value or if they have a value for potential affordable housing or any of these things.
Piece of property you're trying to save have a potential for affordable housing?
Absolutely. I think that any property does. But I also think, to the point on Glendale Middle Road, that this property is not on the bus line and it is not walkable to town. And if you're going to build housing, especially rental housing, where it's at 30 to 50% AMI, which is low income, that you're going to have to make sure people can get around. And so that would score against either of these properties. But it's not like we're kind of preferencing, I don't know.
It comes off.
Yeah, well, that's why I gave you feedback. I don't, yeah, okay.
Okay, Sir?
Sure. Joe Katz on 6 Hill Road. I just want to thank everyone because I think it's a really important message that the town's saying that they're supporting the private interests that come forward with this. And maybe that'll really help the project.
Jackie?
Hi, I'm so glad that I'm able to comment. I didn't plan to comment today, but I wanted to just say a few things. The Land Trust isn't interested. Laurel Hill isn't interested. BNRC is not interested. As a standalone parcel, there are no wetlands on this particular parcel. This is looks like, I went yesterday to see the site. It was a relatively, not very dense community. It probably does have water and sewer access. I am concerned about the arbitrary nature of this decision today. I believe it's arbitrary because I do think you have a process in which you vet applications for funding. My understanding is that you don't even have an applicant before you, and you are willing to put forth $100,000, assuming that another $500,000 will be raised. So I'm very concerned about your vetting process for deciding how to spend the town's funds. I'm also very concerned about policy with respect to what appears to be a relatively affluent community and making this type of decision when you have open space needs throughout the town of Stockbridge. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I'll comment slightly that we are never the be all and end all of this. Even if we recommend to town meeting that we think CPA funding should go to this, we don't make the decision, we only make the recommendation. So ultimately, it's the town that makes the decision. They say, no, we don't like this project, and we're not going to vote for it. So we only
Recommend.
Right.
We're just taking a temperature, Jackie. Nobody's spending any money.
And also, like a Crossroad was, growing up there, you had the Thomases, you had the Schulers, you had all these kids all these families very kind of, everyone's parents seem to work at GE. I wouldn't characterize every neighborhood in Stockbridge now is affluent, where the average, where 10 of the last 10 sales have been over $1 million. I mean, I don't even know how to manage that, but it's not like, the Cherry Hill Road or Glendale as areas are any different than Interlake. And all these communities are in a period of transition.
I appreciate that. I'm just looking at your bylaws, and it says that you shall study the needs, possibilities, and resources of the town regarding community preservation. Based on what I've heard today, I haven't heard that you have actually studied this parcel for advancement. So I remain concerned, but I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to that.
Heard about it 3 days ago.
Yeah.
6 months?
No.
Did you want to speak?
Yeah,
No,
6 months.
Okay.
On the table.
Steve?
Available.
Well, almost 14% of the land area of this town is in some form of either conservation restriction or other restriction that prevents building. I think it's enough. The most compelling need in this town is affordable housing. Not the way very well. This is not a strategic look at those issues as affected by even this rump vote. And there was a comment made, I'm sorry, I can't see beyond the lectern, so I don't know who made the comment over here. Is it Linda? Oh, hi.
What comment?
Well, you made a number of comments about the, excuse me, about the lack of strategy in looking at this land and looking at, Jackie just made a comment about the fact that there was no no evidence brought before this committee about, there's anecdotal evidence,
We're not allowed to touch those.
but that's all there is. And I think this is just a bad way to plan. This is not called planning. This is about feeling good for the afternoon. The fact of the matter is that there is no applicant for something like this. The owner of the land has submitted a letter to the town saying that the land is under contract. That is the beginning of the 120-day period under the statute. And as I understand it, the select board has voted to allow the 120 days to run.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we doing here? I don't understand what you've all done.
We
I'm
have.
not sure that you do either.
We have had a number and enough, let me put it that way, enough emails and other conversations from the public that we felt that we had the obligation to meet, to discuss what is being put in front of us. We don't know what that is. We don't know that we would put a conservation restriction on it. Because we do not have an application, that's why we're not voting anything. It might turn out that we would put a conservation restriction on part of the property and develop part of the property, but we would have to work with other organizations to come up with the ultimate plan. We are not there yet. We know we're not there yet.
Which is why this meeting is premature.
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not, because
No,
we have.
it's responsive to
people
voters.
asking us what we think. And we felt that it was necessary to be responsive to those people. I'll get to you in just a second. Ma'am, down here, would you like to speak?
Yes, my name is Margaret Ellen Katz. I'm at 6 Hill Road, in the neighborhood. One thing I just wanted to, I have several things, but one of the things is.
I think you need to speak up, Margaret.
Have the Wallers, do they even know this is going on?
Yes.
And they have no interest?
I sure didn't say that.
Okay. So, I just want to make sure, because I know they go away for a lot later. I thank you for being so responsive. We only learned about it a couple of days ago, but I really appreciate that. I really appreciate this discussion that this is going to keep coming back at the town. And it seems like there needs to be someone who is fundraising for these situations or some group, because you can't help but be reactive when these happen, no fault to anyone. And Stockbridge is a precious place, and I say that from the perspective not of being elite, but of historic. It's a beautiful place that when people come, they speak of what it does to their bodies, what it does to how well they feel. There are fewer and fewer places like this in the country. This administration wants to, just take down all the trees in national parks. So this is really important, and beauty and a place of refuge and sanctuary is really important for humans. And so I really think that I obviously would like this property to be, what did you call it, work together. That would be my ideal. But I really come at it from a perspective of beautiful places need to exist, and also people need to be able to come to them. It's not just for us as Stockbridge residents. This is like going someplace that's meaningful and healing, and there is no price on that.
Okay, thank you.
Natasha.
Natasha?
Sorry, I've been twitching in the chair here. I really want to deeply, deeply thank all of you for pulling this meeting together. I know this was very last minute. It feels like we all found out about this last week. Patrick, you've been really fantastic about pulling people together and connecting the dots. And again, just wanted to say a huge thanks. I really, fall on the side of, and I'm sorry, I don't know names, but the committee member who said that this is a precedent. I mean, I do think there has to be a moment in time where, maybe this piece of land doesn't have anything that's particularly distinguished about it, but it is the home to, we live adjacent to this property on 6 Interlake and Cross, so we will abut the subdivision in one way or another. So, for personal reasons, this is deeply undesirable for us. But, above and beyond, our little family at 6 Interlake and Cross, that's a personal thing. But, we see black bears and bear cubs multiple times a year. We see foxes, we see deer. We have an incredible ecosystem of birds. I mean, this is really what's precious and at the heart of conservation. It's the wildlife and the displacement of the wildlife, the joy that these creatures bring to the neighborhood, the beauty of the forest, the clean air, the lack of overcrowding, the fact that, as the previous speaker said, it's a place of respite and tranquility in a world where so little of that exists. And, look, this again may not be a historically important piece of land, but it is a continuous piece of beautiful property that I think brings a lot of joy to a lot of people in the neighborhood. I think there are obviously, there's the kind of pure view that we cobble together the money collectively and figure out how to fund this. But Patrick, I appreciate, your pragmatic approach, which is, look, if there were 2 houses, I think we could all live with that. And I think exploring the gray areas in between would be really helpful. I guess just to kind of wrap up, we're willing to do whatever it takes. If I have to go door to door with, an impassioned speech, I will do that. I realize there's discomfort about the fact there isn't a plan, but, sometimes this is the way things have to happen. If there's enough critical mass and there's the will, and we want to put that stake in the ground, I think there'll be people in the neighborhood, the Bedells, who are our friends and neighbors, certainly us. I think there's a number of other people who Jeremy has been in touch with who are willing to, contribute insofar as we can to try to bridge the gap if that's at all possible. But I certainly want to fight. I don't think that we should just accept it. I mean, we should at least try. That's my perspective.
Okay, thank you. All right, Grant McCarthy, did you wish to speak?
I'll merely echo what Natasha said. So we own the property at 6 Lake and Cross. I think the meeting's been very effective. Good to hear brief perspectives. I think Natasha said was perfect. We will work to lobby the neighborhood to see if we can find other ways of funding. And if we need to compromise and allow a couple of houses be built on Lake and Cross, and then we protect the land behind it, I think that's a fair compromise. So eager to work with everybody to try and find a solution that meets the needs of all parties.
Okay, thank you. Rich, does this change what you might take back to the land trust at all?
I will communicate it back to the land trust.
Okay.
I will try not to, I want to be factual. So I'm going to represent what I think is what I'm hearing from this. And I will respond, I'll let you know what the consensus of our board is. If I may, I'd like to just say something as a resident and not the land trust. I would like to see this land protected, but I also feel that there is an opportunity with the work with the select board and whomever else, if it has to be, if the person purchasing this, and it's not a consortium, develops on it, and if it is a modest development of a handful of houses where a bulk of that property is conserved, I don't think that's the worst case. I mean, I think that's a suitable scenario. But I would like to see the land conserved. I'd like to see it conserved with Craig Moffat's land if and when that becomes available. I do think that the only way this is really going to truly happen is through a consortium of people who are going to come together and fund it to make it happen. As I also wear a hat as being on the finance committee, and I would just say that if I was putting on my finance committee hat, I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse without a plan. And I feel like that needs to be balanced out in a way that is realistic and doesn't put this burden just simply on the town. The town residents have to step up in above and beyond the town meeting. Like we have to find a way to bring this together. And I do feel like we need to prioritize our importance to this town, so that we're not constantly placed in this sort of reactive posture, which has happened now a few times over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
Yeah, we definitely have the cart before the horse on this one. And, you know, as other people have said, we need to get a plan and we need to think about the plan for the whole town and which pieces of property are developable. However, having said that, if we don't get our hands on this piece of property, we will have no control over what happens to it. So whether that involves limiting the amount of development that happens on the property, say, for instance, 4 houses, which would not adversely affect the neighborhood. That's just a number that I threw out. It could be 6, I don't know. But I think the fear is that with the 35 acres in an R2, that it could be a really significant number of houses.
Right.
And that would definitely change the neighborhood. And it would disconnect the Ackley property with Craig's property, which while Craig's property doesn't have a CR, it can't be built, it's a wetland. And the migration from a conservation point of view, the migration of the critters that live there, so much of the Waller property is open and critters can go wherever they want to, and contiguous lands are extremely important in terms of wildlife passage. So
Developer is willing to pay $600,000 for a piece of land, which conservatively is 2 or 3 times its value. They're going to develop more houses.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, and thank you, everybody, for coming.
Did the note get passed around?
Yes.
Right here.
Jay had a question.
Can I just make one quick point that from my perspective, this committee has not considered the matter a black and white issue. What we have done here today is encouraged all the participants, the coalition involved, to come forward with some alternatives that we can explore further so that we can make an informed decision. Okay, and we owe it to our town to at least give the residents the opportunity to present themselves in an organized fashion.
Yes.
End of case. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, did you want to say anything?
We want to go home.
Well, try not to go over well. And so we also have to keep in mind that anytime we're dealing with community preservation funds, half the funds come from the state. We're under certain obligations on how we handle this money. So the first thing is, without an applicant, you cannot advance the article to town meeting. You don't have an applicant that can be given it. So there's been no grant, there's been nothing, there's no article to go forward to town meeting.
Right.
So
Points have been made, though.
We understand that.
all right, I want to make sure, but not getting sent at 100,000, but then nothing's going to this town meeting.
No.
No, that was a straw poll. It wasn't even a vote. It was like, what might we put toward?
And there's one of the things that I think I'm most hearing here is that you guys want to come up with a plan. So there's 2 ways that the CPC can hand out money. One is by an applicant. The other as initiatives done through the planning process of the CPC committee. So you can set up a CPC, and I think, Linda, this is what you were possibly referring to. The CPC committee can set up basically a master plan for this committee, and then have projects that you can initiate where people can come forward to you, and you can fund those projects from even individuals, say, in that neighborhood that want to do it. But in the absence of a plan, you can only do things via the
being the applicant. So,
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind as we move forward.
We do get that.
All right.
And I move to adjourn.
Can I have one question, it's the point of process here.
Yes.
What is the timeline in order for the town to have an applicant, for you to vote on something for this?
Well, we'd have to get it in town
I
warrant.
get that.
Which is, what's the deadline for
So
that?
it looks like the select board will probably be closing the town warrant Thursday.
Yeah.
So
What's the last date we could close it?
the first,
That's right.
31st, the first.
First of May.
So we could wait,
So we could wait.
yes.
Yeah.
The first, we'd have to close the warrant.
And today is what, the 20, so that seems to be 9 days.
So barring that, which it seems unlikely that we can pull this together in that amount of time, it would have to go to a special town meeting, which is expensive and time consuming and all of those things for community preservation to put forward the town has to vote on whatever we decide.
Right. And the
So-
funds would have to be fully in place prior to June 8th in order to
Right.
execute.
Well, we have our reserve fund, which we could tap into but it would require town meeting to approve it. And it would have to be a special town meeting if we don't get it together by this town meeting, which I can't even imagine that could happen.
All right, so we had a motion to adjourn on the floor.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Aye.
It's not adjourned, you can't go.
Sorry, Hillary. I'm like, oh, shoot, do that.
I know, well, it's been a long time, so.
Oh.
Like, this is the town.
Thank you.
So the residents know about it?
We did.
All right, Erica, have a good day.
See you, Patrick.
There you go.
That was.